We have an exciting episode today, Matt.
Oh yeah, who do we got on here?
We've got old Adam Martin over at Martin Building Group down in the deep south of Louisiana. Actually, that is a really good song, Louisiana Saturday Night. I think it's like not Mel Gibson. He's an actor. Who sings that? Do you know?
Mel Gibson. Yeah. I don't know. Can you maybe sing a little bit?
Oh my God, what is it? It's and you take down the fiddle and you take down the bow, kick off your shoes and you throw them on the floor, dance in the kitchen till the morning light, Louisiana Saturday Night.
Wow. Now I know it. Wow. Yeah, that was really good. That was great. It was great. So what are we talking about today?
We're talking about cost. We talk about cost every time. Profitable projects, biggest losing projects. Adam has an incredible perspective on it because he runs a really tight lump sum process over there. And it boils down to costs. I think if you're somebody who's wanting to understand how to be massively diligent and you are someone who struggles with really confidently tracking down to the penny your costs, this is going to be a great episode because Adam insulates himself and his business to a pretty incredible degree by taking those processes.
I think that's well said. I think let's get into it here. Let's hear from Adam.
Well, we have Adam Martin here with Martin Building Group for episode 4 of Builders, Budgets, and Beers. Thanks for jumping on, Adam.
Yeah, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you're in the truck. Why are you in the truck? Are you on a job site?
Man, builders live from our trucks. So this is my mobile office, and you got to be on the go. So we got Wi-Fi going, and I'm sure a lot of other people walking by behind me, activity happening. So we're going to make the most of our time.
That's right.
You said it's a GMC. GMC.
Is there any other kind of truck?
Well, I think the rankings of most American is like Ford, Dodge, Chevy, then GMC.
Whoa!
I think that's number 4.
Whoa! Yeah,
I know I like Builder Trend a lot.
This is going to be a good podcast. I'm stoked. All right, so we'll just to taper things off here, and we don't lose all of our Dodge followers getting aced by Ford people, and now we have our guest who's a GMC guy getting crushed on Ford. We'll put a poll in the bottom of this and let our listeners tell us what the actual most American brand of truck is. But
my dad worked at Chrysler and then Ford, so that's why I was able to rank Ford and then Dodge.
That's right, Michigan,
and then Chevy's just a little bit more, I think, salt of the earth than GMC. GMC is kind of acronyms. You got to watch out for acronyms.
Those people too are generational brands. Like rarely do I find somebody that drives something different than what their grandfather drove. So
yeah. I mean, Chevy and GMC are the same company, so it shouldn't hurt too bad. All right. Sorry, I won't distract anymore.
No. This is good. This is all authenticity, and even just to tie this all in, Adam's in his truck, so obviously he can't test beers with us. But we're just going to go ahead and audible with the old trusty Miller Lite. We're going to go with the Miller Lite because Adam's not a big beer drinker. And again, we're a little late on the ball here. So this is what was in the fridge at the old Barnes household. We're going to go ahead and do a quick beer ranking just to kind of calm the nerves a little bit, get the old chatter fluid ripping. And Miller Lite, now part of the Coors family. And actually, Matt, it's Miller Coors, right? Or has there been a flip-flop since? Or do you
I don't know. I do think it's Miller Coors, though. That sounds right.
Yeah, I know they've been some shuffling around. I don't know, these big conglomerates, they get a little hairy. So Miller Lite, the choice of beer in my household. We're going to go ahead and give it a swig. Crisp, refreshing. Just reminds me of the Platte River in Grand Island, Nebraska. This is going to be totally biased because this is the creme de la creme of domestic light beer. Miller Lite 9.8, nothing more to be said. It's the old trusty, you know exactly what you're getting, especially when it comes in a bottle. It just does the trick every single time. So we'll go ahead and do this. Jumping right in, we get the old beer tasting out of the way. Adam, the question that we're all dying to hear as we follow the theme on builders, budgets, and beers. What is the project that Martin Building Group has lost the most money on?
Whew, man, you guys are really asking the tough ones today.
Well, maybe before we get into
actually,
it, tell us a little bit about what is Martin Building Group? Tell us about it.
I totally botched that. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Let's pump the brakes.
How much money have you lost?
Yeah,
tell us how much money you've lost.
The Miller Lite's already talking here. Let's go into Martin Building Group. My apologies.
No, all good. So we're a newer entity of longstanding family businesses. Martin Building Group is a luxury home builder as well as a commercial builder. We kind of cut our teeth. I cut my teeth in the industry as a commercial builder, primarily doing large scale commercial projects, and then joined cohorts with my family business just a few years ago, and picked up the legacy of luxury homes, multi-million-dollar homes, and that's a primary prong, so to speak, of our company today, both luxury residential as well as targeted select boutique commercial. So what we do for our products is primarily, that it's going to have high amenities, high finishes, one-offs. No two projects are the same. So we're not a production builder. We're very much a custom builder in the market of. We're in South Louisiana, and we primarily work in the Gulf South. So that's just our size to scale, just to give listeners kind of a picture. Less than 10 employees, less than 10 million, between 5 and 10 million a year in terms of scale. And we're just happy to do the book of business that the Lord gives us every year.
Love it. It's not uncommon for us to hear, guys that have families that are in building, and then they go off and they start a career in commercial, and then they come back to the family business. Who did you work for from a commercial side? What types of projects were you working on? And then ultimately, what gave you the push back into residential and light commercial?
Yeah. So I worked for a regional builder, Kent Design Build, in the Gulf South, and just well-respected company, big design build firm. And we primarily targeted negotiated design build projects, about $100 million a year company in the industry, and I had the privilege to be a leader in that company there. But really, what drove me to kind of step away from that into a much smaller scale platform, obviously outside of business ownership, being a huge entrepreneurial spirit, wanting to scratch that itch. Just the creativity side. So having now worked on both sides of the fence, commercial and residential. For me, the residential side, especially on the luxury side, it allows you to be very creative, using select materials, unique materials, design obviously heavily influenced. Whereas on the commercial side, you don't get to have that appreciation for the end product maybe as much, simply because the materials and the minimalistic approach that's common to maybe larger scales, but the creativity side of it is not, in my opinion, what it is on the high-end residential. And so we really pride ourselves getting to do something that's unique on every single project. So that's really one of my passions of why I wanted to kind of come back into it.
I love it. And even then, so like obviously like with the commercial side, a lot more calculated, right? A lot more planning, a lot less of that creativity. Like specifically on the home building side, like what are the challenges and the pros that come with the creative aspect? Yeah.
Naturally, because especially in the custom, luxury world, everything's an option. There's not the rules of engagement, or there are no rules of engagement typically.
Right.
So there's good and bad to that, in the sense that when I mean by rules of engagement, if budget allows, then anything's possible. And so where the materials are sourced from, what they're made of, how things go together. When it's truly custom, it's fully custom. And it's not just, hey, here's your 3 options, take a pick. So that creates, some freedom and some challenges with that, because, from a clientele standpoint, if they want it and they have the ability to pay for it, then let's figure out a way to make it happen.
Adam, have you ever, on the creative point, have you ever done any of the kind of historic home builds or historic restorations down there in New Orleans? Obviously, if you're in New Orleans, A lot of the homes.
Yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of the truly historic as deemed by the city historic. Most all of our projects though will still have the architectural style of the historic nature, especially in certain projects where you got, like in big French Quarter, French and Spanish influence of wrought iron, decorative metals, things of that nature. The demand of many clients, even if it's a new build, still wants much of that flavor.
Yeah. And are most of your clients from New Orleans or moving to New Orleans for the first time, or from Louisiana or moving to Louisiana?
We have a mixed bag. We're on most of our work is just outside of the city, about 30 miles. And so we live in a suburban community where if people commute into the city for work, but they live outside the city. So we have a lot of families that have moved out of, say, downtown, uptown, and wanted to get out a little bit. And then we still have a fair amount of transfers. We have a big oil and gas industry in our market. And so we have a fair amount of families that get relocated every year because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Cool.
Love it. Well, and I think even this is a good segue into the topic that I jumped the gun on, right? With creativity comes flexibility. With flexibility comes its own challenges. Where did Martin Building Group take the biggest hit on a project with that creativity or with that flexibility that builders have managing cash?
Man, I'm a big so for me, my answer would be probably similar. In on both sides of this coin, my biggest wins and my biggest losses have come from the pre-project planning. So let's talk from a loss standpoint. When you talk about losing in one item, tens of thousands of dollars, could be a $50,000 loss on an item. I'm thinking about in history where, again, highly custom, highly unique. Sometimes the tendency is, we can just throw money at something, an allocation, and throw a dart at the wall and hope that it sticks. And then when we get there, we'll figure it out, right? And I'm going to use the term plug. Builders are notorious sometimes when you're estimating projects to put a plug there, and you have a gut reaction of what you think. Right. But with a plug, right, there's no commitment to cost. There's no quotes on the front end. Maybe it's not even fully designed. And especially in our realm, that's typical that there's a lot of elements that aren't always fully designed. Most of our work is lump sum. So we don't do a lot of cost plus work. So in the lump sum world, I'm giving that owner a committed cost, locked in contract. And so if it's pick a number, $3 million contract on a new build, then said item could be, it could be a $40,000-$50,000 line item for a certain feature. And I can remember particularly on one project where there was a specialty item that we had not done before. And it was this ornate structural steel element in the build. And it had both purpose and load bearing capabilities and practices. And it wasn't designed. It was kind of a smoking gun, so to speak. And when all the dust settled, it was a pretty big swing in terms of what we thought it could cost and what it actually cost. Now, thankfully for us, it wasn't a true loss because it was protected from an allowance. Because we knew going into the industry or from history that, hey, this is not something that we can put in ink. So it was an allowance item, but the owner was really eager to move forward. And so the tendency as a builder is, right, we're constantly managing cash flow. We're constantly managing billings. And so how do we get this project to the starting line quick as we can so we can get billings on the table? And if this is happening 2/3 of the way through the build, well, then we got time to figure this out, right? Thankfully, we knew to make those things an allowance. So when we got there, we were protected. The owner was at risk, and we were still able to move the project forward from a planning and timing standpoint. But it could have been pretty big disaster had we not created an allowance for that item and communicated it with utmost clarity to the client up front, right? And so for us, it was a lesson learned for me, despite financial losses or not, that we can't compromise on the pre-planning. Even when, here's the thing, even when your client says it's okay, right? Let's move forward because they're eager to get going, and that's something that's happening 6 months down the road. It's a lot easier to talk about it on the front end when emotions aren't a part of it versus in the moment when emotions are high, schedules are now, at risk. And so pre-planning, here's what I mean by that. You can spend a fraction of the cost on design work, or you can spend what it really takes on design work. And for the times in my career that we've tried to, hey, let's go light on the design, put our money into the build, it never comes out well. It costs somewhere. Mm-hmm. So even if it doesn't cost in design money, it's going to cost in time. It's going to cost in delays. It's going to cost in rework or coordination of materials coming together because you didn't have the details. Not to mention just the frustration of not having the information. So we do our best to guide our customers to spend the amount of time, energy, and monies on the proper design work so that we know what we're building, what it looks like, we know what the costs are, and then everything's just working the plan.
Totally. Well, and that makes a lot of sense, even considering your background in commercial, right? Heavy plan, heavy execution. Obviously, you get the creativity side here. But even in these types of one-off scenarios, what are you doing? Obviously, you have allowances built in to mitigate risk to Martin Building. But how are you getting this information to even get a ballpark? I mean, it's obvious like all design, working with subs and vendors. But to take that type of risk, is it purely just like everything's hard bid up front to mitigate that issue and then run a PO process? Or how do you get that
for us, we haven't found, especially on the residential side, on the luxury residential, we haven't found a good system because, again, most of our stuff is all unique. So we haven't found a good system to eliminate allowances completely. So we still have allowances on our projects. But we do a really good job of tracking costs for history. Okay. And even though every project's a one-off, there's still enough historical data on our spreadsheets and projects that we can go back and say, okay, this may not look the same, but on average, this is what we know these types of elements or finishes are going to cost. And so we try to give some really good indicators on the front end. And there's some builders that they're going to take the approach of, hey, the lowest allowance possible to get the contract to the table, and then we're just going to work change orders way out. That's not, in terms of my opinion, best practice because it just breeds adversarial relationships. So we really try to be transparent with the cost, know our numbers backwards and forwards, which then allows us to accurately communicate with the customer, hey, this is a specialty item. Here's reality of what it's probably going to cost. And here's a range or an allocation for that. And until the finishes and selections are completely done, this is a working number, right? And then we track that in real time. And it just seems to me the whole situation is diffused because there's nothing to hide. Everything's transparent. And we've prepared them for what to expect going into it. So historical data combined with, to me, detailed plans is what allows the project to be successful and financially stable.
Yeah. Adam, could you share? So I thought Reese's question was great around upfront. How are you pulling this together and having confidence in your bid, right? Because to your point, you want it to be somewhat within reason to avoid fighting with your client or even just, anger between you and your client later on. What percentage of your upfront bids are subject to an allowance, like roughly on average?
Oh, I would say of total contract value to allowances, I would say less than 20%. Is an allowance item. And we can drive that even lower depending on the build. Like historically, some projects may have all cabinetry items as an allowance. Well, that's only for the clients that on the beginning design phase can't land the plane as to how much cabinetry they want. Meaning, is it 11 foot tall? Is it all the way to the ceiling? Right? A lot of our customers can nail those things early on. But that one big ticket item could be a big swing. I mean, that could be a 6-figure swing depending upon the scope. Typically, though, it's going to be limited to those items that are truly selection driven, flooring, plumbing fixtures, lighting fixtures. Those are kind of the big three that we land on typically.
Okay. So if you said $3 million project earlier on, you feel pretty good about 80% of it up front. You feel pretty good about 2.4 million of it is where you feel good. And then do you give them a range?
For me, honestly, I feel pretty good about 99% of it. But that 15% or whatever that number is that you threw out, say that extra 600,000, the only thing that dictates that change is whether the client changes it. Yeah. So that 600,000 is very firm in my mind, unless they decide, well, I want something a little more, right? Yeah. And so that's really why it's open ended.
And is that firm because you get the design done early on, or is it because of your historical data and your confidence in your ability based on experience?
It's both. So take plumbing fixtures, for example. I don't need anything designed to know what an average spend on typical home plumbing fixtures would run. Right now, I can force that number to be anything, but odds are if the clientele is similar to past customers, they're going to land between here and here, right? Some range of numbers. And if I lead them incorrectly, I can say, oh yeah, you could do it for half that, but that's not reality, because when they get to the showroom and they see the selections that they really have available, well, it's going to end up being what I think it's going to be. And some customers, right on the front end, a lot of customers, honestly, they're very price driven on the front end because they're trying to get to a budget. But when they actually get into it and emotions are a part of it and they start seeing the products and the materials come together, they tend to stretch and say, well, let's spend an extra $5,000 here. Right. And so what I try to do is just help my customers understand typically where they're going to end up, not where they start, and prepare them. So regardless of what the house looks like, if it's got 4 bathrooms in it, and it's 3 custom showers, well, then we know, okay, here's what the real allowance is going to be. Regardless of what you think it's going to be, here's probably about what it's going to be.
Well, and that's one piece that I wanted to touch on is like, yeah, to Matt's point is like, you're confident because it's a little bit of both the heavy pre-design side, right? And then the heavy historic job costing background, whether it's close or not. I literally had a demo this morning with a builder out of Boston, and they were doing all what I call beck and call custom home building, right? Whatever the client wants, they do. And the conversation that we had around job costing was, he's like, honestly, our stuff is so different all the time that we haven't really allocated the time to job cost because it doesn't really give us that much information. That's why I want to call this out, because it has nothing to do with like the dead nuts. What is this actually going to cost? It's that idea that you can marry up with a more methodical and diligent pre-con process to say, from a client experience standpoint and trying to get clients to budgets and really have an accurate idea of what they're asking for and what it's going to cost. You do need that historic information, whether it is crazy custom or it is, because it's not that it's going to tell you the path and like, here's what it's going to cost to the dime. It's based on my experience and expertise as a builder, having done this for sometimes decades, right? This is why I'm the guy that you should go with over the next person.
Yeah. And I always try to really communicate to our clientele, everything is a function of size, ultimately, not just square footage, but the overall scope. So when we back into what does it cost, I have to start with a basis of quantities. Everything's driven ultimately from a quantity somewhere, somehow. And then it start adding in, okay, what's the complexity of that quantity, right? And so we talk about it internally with our team. If we're evaluating a bid from a subcontractor, we have to first know what his quantities are to know and even closely evaluate where his price should be. So we had a project the other day that first meeting, walked the property, nothing. It's a virgin site. And we said, okay, what's an average budget, right? Well, that's always the $1 million question. What's the cost per square foot to build a house today?
Right.
And the reality is, kudos to our team, because the number that we threw out when we actually priced it was within $1 of what we thought it would be. And that's not because, we're just beyond experts in our field. No, the reality is we know our numbers. And so we don't have to go and shop quotes from everybody, because we've now demonstrated that we've got good cost history and plus or minus the selections, right? And so, yeah, the number could be less or it could be more, but as long as you stay within a certain range of viability of selections and options, then yeah, this is a realistic budget. And so it was very, satisfying and gratifying to go back to that client and say, hey, remember what we told you we think it's worth? Well, here's the actual backup detailed spreadsheet that demonstrates, yep, that's exactly what it costs.
Love it. Love it. Well, and even then with you guys being so calculated and numbers driven, I mean, the listeners are dying to know, like, what is the biggest loss that you guys have made? Like, again, being calculated, like what was the one that you went negative on that you guys maybe motivated you to be more data driven? But what was the number on the biggest loss?
Well, I'll reach back to some of my previous life, and usually, man, there's so many variables sometimes, especially when you think about on complex projects. But 50 grand is the number that I recall in one single line item. And it was simply just a matter of protection of risk versus expectations. Sometimes we had a project team that didn't want to communicate on the front end reality, because it was trying to land the project. And so they were sugarcoating really what the costs were in terms of allowances in hopes that it could be done. It was probably more wishful thinking than anything. And in reality, we knew better. We knew what the costs were. But it was one of those items that it was a scope unknown. And instead of getting wise counsel amongst the team and saying, hey, what do you think is a realistic budget? The team went off on a silo and totally just put a plug number for something that they thought without asking what the quantity is, without asking what the scope really truly might be. Because again, you pick up the phone and you talk to 3 people in the industry about said item, if it's a specialty item, then you're going to get pretty close. Because just like builders, we may want to know our numbers. If you hire in qualified trades, they know their numbers and they should know their numbers. So if I have a sub that I say, hey, how much is it for this? And we talk through the scope, even if it's not designed, and they say, well, I have no idea. That should be red flag number 1. Maybe he's not the qualified guy to do this job.
Right. And Adam, have you ever in the history of Martin Building Group, have you lost money on a project as a fixed price builder?
So in my tenure, so I've just now transitioned 2 years into my self-employment world, business ownership world, and I have yet to lose money on a project.
Dang. Love it.
Now, again, I don't have a lot of track record as an individual, but Lord willing, we plan right, and that day is going to come. Okay, guys, I'm not naive to think it won't come, but
well, I think that's great. I mean, I guess, apologies to cut you off, but as a fixed price builder, like the nature of that model is yes, there's more upside potential, right? If we can manage cost and we can get this done the right way, but it also comes with a severe risk, COVID being one of the most notorious of all these people that get into fixed price contracts, and they might not have allowances, they might not have contingency in place, escalation clauses, whatever. And that's where I get the phrase of, with a fixed price builder, it's really a race to margin. And that's where I think it's even interesting how you explain, like, on a line item, I've lost 50 grand, because that's really how fixed price guys look at it, right? Is on a fixed price cost by a line item standpoint, you need to know, how am I clipping along, and what do I expect this to cost, what it's actually cost, and where am I going to be breaking? Because as soon as you break, that's margin, right? Unless we can bury it and shuffle it somewhere in the project, and we know. But yeah, I mean, I think that is a benefit. But again, to be a fixed price builder and do it well and have 10 years of never taking a loss, you got to know your numbers.
You got to know your numbers. Yeah. And that's not to say, again, to clarify, that there hasn't been individual line items, right, that took a loss. But as the total gross at the end of the day, or even net, as long as you're tracking your numbers and you know globally where you are, then, it should work out well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Obviously, we haven't had that many episodes so far. You're the first person to answer this loss question on a line item level. And perhaps the reason you haven't lost money at a project level is because you think on a line item level, talking about it.
That's the way you have to look at it. I can't just look at the total, because I've met guys and even had project managers who are like, oh man, I picked up 30 grand over here just in my mind on that project, when they didn't realize, well, they had 10 line items that were red, and they're only thinking about the wins, and you can get in trouble quick.
Well, even from like a cash flow management standpoint, like, I know we're talking about tracking costs, but in a cash flow management standpoint, like, how many builders are out there that have a bank account that they run all of their receivables through, and they look at it and they say, I've got $1 million in cash, I've got $500,000 in cost, I'm good. but they're thinking about it in wholes, right? They're not thinking about it of this money is for this project, and then taking it the step further of it's not even that I'm cash flush on this project, but am I spending money for these line items and costs for the appropriate amounts that I'm drawing for, right? Even if they're going from just the lump account into a project account, or even like a more diligent standpoint, they still got to know by the line item, because all that impacts accounting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we've had times where, because we're tracking it in those laser focused line items, then even if we wanted to go and say, let's spend money on something, well, we have the transparency and the visibility to do it, to accelerate the schedule, to make a customer satisfied because they felt like they didn't get something that they wanted. So we're going to make it right by, spending money to emotional intelligence, on something. And you can't do that if you're not tracking your costs.
Totally. I love it. All right. Well, Adam doesn't lose. That's a synopsis, which we love to hear.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I just said yet. Maybe it won't. It will happen, but not yet.
Classic GMC here. Just what doesn't admit his weaknesses. Riding around in the GMC, just floating above.
Yeah. Old Martin Building Group, the creme de la creme. I love it. I think it's great. But honestly, like, even just, again, matching this up with like the podcast guests that we have, and even talking to builders as a whole, like, that's why you don't lose, because you're thinking on that level. And again, that's why we're doing this podcast, right? Make project financials not so intimidating. It is very possible. Does it take work? Does it take education? Does it take diligence? Of course, but it's not impossible, right? Are we done on the losers and we want to talk about winners, or do we have anything else that we want to, sprinkle into this conversation? It's going well.
Yeah, this is great.
All of our thoughts are on the table. Go ahead, Adam.
In the I was just gonna say in the next thought, again, the biggest wins, thinking lump sum contracts, the biggest wins come because you know your numbers. And so sometimes that plays out where, honestly, to me, the biggest wins have been when you do a lot of pre-front planning to protect the worst case scenario, right? And then everything just falls into place. Schedule, weather, trades, right? To me, the biggest win sometimes is when there's double ups and scopes. That's just like early Christmas gifts where you didn't think you did, but that sub picked up something that he wasn't supposed to have, and you covered it for him anyway. And you're like, oh man, thank you.
Early Christmas gifts.
I will let you do that, right?
The idiot tax is the more negative way to look at it.
Well, I guess that sub's not paying attention to their line items.
That's right.
They're just doubling up the scope there.
Yep. So, having project managers that are truly writing scopes, watching scopes, because look, guys, change orders are real, especially on luxury residential, because you're thinking about worlds of allowances and unique builds. And so change orders are areas where you can also lose and gain. I know we've talked about losses, but my father's got a lot of more decades on me, and change order process, change order management has always been a weak link in the industry. And I've heard stories from him when it talks about scope creep and change orders and not managing that down to the actual costs and real-time approvals. That will take a job that's fat and happy and on track, and next thing you know, when all the dust settles, holy cow, how did we end up here? And so we've seen great wins in managing those approvals in real time, and not waiting to the end, because that's the easy thing. Hey, this is under contract lump sum. We're just going to build our draw schedule and all these other things on the side. We'll just catch those when we get to them. We have time to process. Look, at the end of the project, cash is tight. Owners are exhausted. They're ready to be done. And the last thing you want to do is have to negotiate a big amount of uncollected change orders. And of course, it's all amnesia at that point, right? Those things have been gone and forgotten.
Yep.
So we've had big wins on real-time approvals in real time for real costs and tracking those numbers.
Yeah. I think you said that earlier in the podcast. You said clients are really sensitive to kind of the upfront price, but then as it progresses, right, let's spend $5,000 more here. I think the same principle applies with change orders, right? If you wait till the end and you hit them with a $300,000 bulk change order, that's not going to work. But if it's spread out over the course of a year, over the course of the project, much more palatable.
Yep. And the thing that I've faced is because those selections are sometimes ongoing because of the inability to make a decision for a customer. They're just fearful or fear of making the wrong decision, so they delay making a decision. Well, that ends up meaning your cost is not known until sometimes it's done. And there was a day where I saw really blended, broad job cost numbers, and it was framing material and labor, or flooring, right? Just flooring. Mm-hmm. And man, that doesn't tell me anything. That's one number. And so I need to know what was the wood flooring on this job, and what was the allowance, and where did that truly lasering come in? Because it's the only way I can track it. So we push really hard to see that in real time, ongoing.
I love it. Well, and again, like even to the winning side, it's all about managing costs. To your point with like structuring cost codes and doing this. I mean, you hear so many people say, "Well, I just allocate everything into one of two cost codes, labor and material." It's like, well, at that point, like, what are we doing? Why even categorize costs at that rate?
And I'll tell you too, just for guys listening, some of your financial counsel, even like on the accounting side, CPAs, accountants, they don't understand our industry always. There are definitely some out there, and I would encourage guys to find those when they're working with firms. Find the ones that understand our industry, because sometimes they will I've had guys make advice and counsel that really wasn't helpful for me to run my company. It may have been best practice for an accounting standpoint because it made that simple and clean. But we have to know our numbers and peel the onion back on a job basis, and not 12 cost codes. I mean, when you ask me how many cost codes, we've probably got 200 cost codes on a job, or more. I'd have to count them. But the more layers, the more transparency. And it doesn't mean it's more work, okay? It doesn't mean at all it's more work. It simply means that when costs come in, well, now I have way more options of where to allocate it to. Mm-hmm. And so it allows me to dissect that in micro pieces, right? So do what's best for your business, not necessarily what is best from an accounting practice. And I would tell you that the more detailed, the better when it comes to running a construction company.
Again, makes a ton of sense coming from a builder like you, who is all of this upfront, what might seem intimidating, 200 cost codes is all going to pay off in dividends from a historic categorization and data insight standpoint, right? It's worth it to go into that level, not even just for current project and current cost progression, but even in the future. Now we have this level of granularity that we can come back in and we can pull reports on it. We can see what did a similar scope cost?
Yeah, no, you think about my concrete estimate. I mean, it's going to be several lines deep on foundations. It's not going to be concrete material, concrete labor. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're going to have a charge for a pump truck in there. And just recently, talking about a line item loss, we lost on a pump truck because it was a line pump, not a boom pump. And historically, those are more cost, they're more labor intensive. But we thought we could boom it when we bid the job. And then because of the site conditions and the weather that happened, we couldn't get this pump into the site, so we had to line pump it. But we knew, okay, after that event happened, we saw the loss on that one granular item. So what did my guys do? We adjusted our baseline estimate on the template side so that the next project that we built with similar conditions, we had a line item for line pump and boom pump. And we knew those rates, and we fixed it. It was a one-time learning lesson, and we fixed it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't grossed into, concrete foundation, right? Or just even material or equipment.
So if you don't catch that, is that where you as a fixed price builder start to bleed? Like if you can't make that adjustment to the baseline estimate and correct that, is that where you're just like, shit, we're out? Like we're going to lose on this?
Because if I can't, the first thing that's going to happen is if at the end of the day, let's just say it's a gross number, net $30,000 loss. Mm-hmm. Well, you're going to say, well, where did that happen? So then you're going to try to go to the next level, and let's go to the scope. Well, if the scope's grouped, well, now you got to go back and say, well, give me the invoices that were charged to that. Well, if it's 30 invoices, well, now you're manually looking through 30 invoices to try to find the one item that you think was out of line. Mm-hmm. So it's not any more work. It's just if you put forth the systems in the front end, Well, now the transparency is there. So literally in my office, I can pull up a spreadsheet. I can look in real time and see every single line item, green or red, green or red, green or red in real time. And then because of the additional tools we have, I can then see the backup invoice that supports those numbers on the fly.
Love it. Love it. Well, and even in terms of like winning, so like where does a fixed price builder have their biggest wins? Like, and what's the scenario? Is it you coming in and knowing your numbers tight enough, and then you're bidding work that you're like, I could do this, I could build this thing for $1 million in cost and close it at 3 million. So I'm going to run a fixed price contract on it. And I know that's all going to be a ton of margin. I know it might be obnoxious, but like, how do you win big as a fixed price builder?
Honestly, it's not that hypothetical scenario you just threw out. It's micro wins over the course of the whole project that yield the best value, the best, biggest wins. So when we look down and say, oh man, that was a $300 savings, that was a $500 savings. Okay, now you're gonna have some negatives, but the goal is you have more positives than negatives at the end of the day. And so you're tracking in real time and seeing what the trend is, because that's the other thing for us. As soon as we start seeing where something's off, well, then we know the last 2/3 after the first third. If we had a loss, but the last 2/3, we got to be really diligent. There's a lot of waste that's in our industry, and so we track things in real time as soon as the material hits the job. And then we really strive to, hey, if there's excess materials, those got to get returned. You got to get credits on that, because you'd be amazed at the amount of stuff that gets delivered, ends up walking, getting damaged, getting thrown away. And sometimes you'll pick up yield just by returning product that was left over,
Yeah. I think the way you've answered it seems like the way you win as a fixed price builder is you are focused on the details and you're willing to act on them, right? In little, small, incremental amounts, whether it's a small change order that needs to go out right now, whether it's splitting out the baseline estimate, et cetera. It seems like you're very focused on the details and you act on them.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. No, that's where we win. Small incremental wins over the course of the job. And next thing you know, it's going to yield high margins.
What's that? I'm blanking on the movie with Al Pacino, the football movie. What's it called? What's that one? You don't know?
I know
I'm not a movie guy.
He says football is a game of inches. It sounds like fixed price building is a game of inches too. There we go.
I don't know. I have no idea. I'll put
the name. What? Any given Sunday? Yes.
Sunday.
Any given Sunday. Any given Sunday. Yes.
Yep.
There we go. Fixed price building is any given Sunday.
Fixed price builders knows his numbers.
I love it.
Any given Sunday.
That's our preferred methodology.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Very insightful. Very, I would say by the book. Like you guys are running a fixed price operation the way that it should be ran. Very data driven, very numbers driven. Put a lot of emphasis and a lot of importance on understanding real time costs to be able to pivot and make decisions to have as many successful projects as possible, which is 100%. And
the thing that was a game changer for us last year that we didn't have before was just workflow approvals. So again, studying those line items in real time.
Yeah.
It's easy. Okay. You guys understand it. I know other builders will. You're getting inundated with invoices weekly on projects, more than you can really manage. And our tendency is to assume that the vendor's right. And quite frankly, that's not always the case. I had a vendor that I do a lot of work with the other day that billed me duplicate billing. Get this, had a different invoice number.
Damn.
Had the same scope, okay? Different invoice number, different address, but the same exact scope, same cost to the penny. And I saw it, and I'm like, there's no way that this is duplicate. This is legit, right? It's not this, and it's two different jobs. I'm like, there's no way I ordered the same amount of packages for the exact penny, and they even had the same PO number on the ticket. So that was a flag to me, like, hey, it's the same PO number. There's no way it's two different orders.
Right.
The first phase was, hey, I think this is wrong. Their accounting team said, no, it's right. It was for this job. It was just charged to the wrong address. Then it got brought back and said, nah, that still don't sound right. I called the manager. He said, no, this is duplicate, and we fixed it. Well, the only way we caught that was because of workflow approvals. Because for us, before we did that, before we had a system like Adaptive, right, where you can have a workflow approval of my team, bills were getting hit. approved manually and paid. Okay.
Mhm.
And my accounting staff, they don't know what's happening in the field enough to know, is this invoice accurate? So for us, when we implemented workflow approvals, now my PM is timestamping saying I signed off on this. So if it's an overage, first thing I want to do is say, well, what happened for the overage? Well, then you can't say, well, I didn't see it, right? Because the only way it gets paid is if it gets approved. So now there's real time, talk about driving accountability, managing your budget. I can sit down with a person with a face and a name and say, why is this overspent? Because you said you approved that, and immediately get to the bottom of it, right? It may be legitimate, but that's how you start changing incremental wins when you can have transparency to see it.
100%. And that's, again, it's bridging that gap of field to office, which is where it's such a difficult process that it's easy for builders to fall on the side of just trust the vendor. And trust the vendor comes at 5 to 6 figure boo-boos.
Because they're people, right? They're busy. They're doing things just like we are, and mistakes are real. So
No, and that's a huge win. And again, we don't do plugs on adaptive on builders, budgets, and beers, Adam. But it's the truth, right? Those are the problems that we run into, and that's why we want to make financials less intimidating. Get the people in the field that know what's going on, that can see it. They can see, how is this encroaching on what I thought this was going to cost? What's actually going to happen if I approve this? I can isolate the problem, I can address the problem, and I can move on. That's the entire concept.
Yeah. I think the workflow, whether you're using adaptive or something else, even a manual process, right? I think that's a huge point, interesting point for the audience. And Adam, what we're going to have coming out for you soon, we're going to limit those cost codes down to just what's on your budget, so we can really control those costs. Like
laser focus.
There we go.
That's right. Really, really shed light on the problem, if there is one. Rarely.
Right. Cool. That was a great episode. I think I learned a lot from that one.
Yeah.
I learned that Adam doesn't lose. He's got a tight process.
lose. Adam doesn't lose. He only wins. And that's because he knows his costs.
Yep.
He does the work. He does the diligence. He knows his costs.
Project planning. That's where it's
simple, not easy. Simple can be easy. Maybe.
Very well
I don't know.
said.
Great episode. A lot of good insight.
It's been fun, guys.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on. And until next time.
All right. Talk to you soon, Adam.
All right, guys. Be good.
Yep. You too.
All right. Let's see you later.